The snowstorm came fast, swallowing the road behind me as I drove through the winding mountain pass. My GPS had already lost signal, and my phone was useless in the growing whiteout. The headlights reflected off the endless sheets of snow, creating an illusion that I was moving through nothingness. I was supposed to be on my way to a winter retreat, a cozy little cabin rented for the weekend. Instead, I was lost in a storm with no visibility and the unsettling feeling that I wasn't alone out here. The road disappeared under the snow, and before I realized it, my tires slid, sending the car spinning. My hands gripped the wheel as the vehicle skidded off the icy pavement, stopping just short of the trees. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I exhaled, trying to process what had just happened. I was stranded. I stepped out of the car, wincing as the cold bit through my clothes. The snow was already up to my calves, and the wind howled like a living thing. I turned in circles trying to get my bearings. That's when I saw them, footprints in the snow, leading into the woods. The strange thing was, they were fresh. Someone had walked this way recently, but there were no prints coming. Whoever made them had gone into the woods and never returned. I hesitated, but staying in my car wasn't an option. The engine was smoking, and I had no way to call for help. My only chance was to follow the tracks and hope they led somewhere. I trudged through the deep snow, my breath coming in ragged clouds. The further I walked, the quieter everything became. The wind died down, and the only sound was the crunch of my footsteps. The footprints continued, leading me to a small cabin nestled between the trees. The windows were dark, and the front door hung slightly open, creaking with the wind. I stepped onto the porch, brushing snow off my shoulders. "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the silence. There was no response. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cabin was eerily warm, as if someone had just been here. A fire still smoldered in the stone hearth, and a cup of tea sat half-finished on a wooden table. But the place was empty. I walked further inside and uneasy. Something about this place felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. That's when I noticed the pictures on the wall. I moved closer, wiping frost from the glass of one of the frames. My stomach turned to ice. It was a picture of me. I stared at it, my mind scrambling for an explanation. In the photo, I was standing outside this very cabin, smiling as if I belonged here. But I had never been here before. My hands trembled as I moved to the next picture. It was another of me, only this time, my expression was different. My eyes were wide, my mouth slightly open as if I had been caught mid-sentence. I turned to the rest of the room, suddenly hyper-aware of the silence. The floorboards creaked behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The door stood open, snow drifting. Then, the footprints inside the cabin, the ones leading from the door, began to change. The snow that had fallen through the open doorway slowly filled them, as if someone was still walking, even though I couldn't see them. A chill crawled up my spine. My breath came in short gasps as I backed toward the door. The wind picked up outside, howling through the trees like a warning. The footprints stopped inches from me, the last indentation sinking deep into the wooden floor. I turned and ran. I didn't stop to close the door. I didn't look back. I barreled through the trees, ignoring the sharp sting of branches against my face, ignoring the burning in my legs as I pushed forward through the thick snow. I had to get out of here. My foot caught on something and I fell hard. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs. I groaned, rolling over to push myself up, but my hand sank into something soft. I looked down. It was a hole, a deep impression in the snow, just big enough for a person, a hole that had been filled. My head spun. The realization hit me all at once. This wasn't just any hole. This was a footprint, a giant human-shaped footprint, as if someone had been lying here, buried beneath the snow. And then I heard it, a whisper, muffled and distant, but unmistakable. It was my own voice, calling out from beneath me. I scrambled away, heart hammering. The snow shifted and a deep groan rumbled beneath the surface. My breath hitched as the whispering grew louder. It was coming from all around me now, rising in a chorus of overlapping voices, all speaking in my own tone. "Help me, help me, help me." The ground beneath me lurched, and I realized, too late, that the footprints I'd been following were never leading to safety. They had been trying to escape. The last thing I saw was the snow swallowing me whole. The snowstorm had come out of nowhere. One minute, the road was clear, the sky a soft gray. The next, thick white flakes fell in suffocating sheets, burying everything in sight. My wipers struggled against the ice forming on my windshield, and my car crawled along the deserted road. I'd been driving for hours already, trying to get back to the city after visiting my parents in the mountains. The storm was getting worse, and I needed to find a place to pull over. My gas gauge was dipping dangerously close to empty, and my phone had lost service miles ago. Just as I started to panic, I saw something up ahead, a figure standing at the side of the road. She was barely visible through the snow, wearing a thin, pale dress that billowed in the wind. It made no sense. No coat, no hat, not even gloves. Just standing, unmoving. I slowed to a stop beside her and rolled down my window. The cold hit me like a punch to the chest. "Hey, do you need a ride?" She didn't answer. I hesitated. Something about her was off. Her face was turned away from me, hidden beneath a cascade of long, dark hair. She was shivering, but she didn't move, didn't even seem to acknowledge my presence. I glanced down the road. There was nothing for miles. If I left her out here, she'd freeze to death. I sighed, reaching over to unlock the passenger door. "Come on, get in." Without a word, she moved, slowly, mechanically. She opened the door and slid into the seat, closing it gently behind her. I turned up the heat, but the second she was inside, the temperature dropped. My breath fogged the air, and I shivered despite the blast of hot air from the vents. I glanced at her, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. "Where are you headed?" She didn't respond. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, fingers thin and stiff, as if they'd been frozen solid. Her skin was pale, too pale, almost bluish under the dim interior lights. I swallowed. I can drop you off at the next gas station," I said, trying to fill the silence. "Shouldn't be too far." Still nothing. I gripped the wheel and focused on the road, trying to ignore the way my skin prickled. The storm raged on, my headlights barely cutting through the endless white. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. Her head was turning, slowly. I didn't dare look at her directly, but I could feel her gaze, heavy and unnatural. And then she whispered something, a breathy, ice-cold whisper. "You shouldn't have stopped." A chill ran down my spine. I finally turned to face her, heart hammering, but her seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes. My chest heaved as I twisted in my seat, scanning the car. She was gone. The door hadn't opened. There were no footprints in the snow outside. The only proof she had ever been there was the lingering chill in the air and the single frostbitten handprint on the inside of the passenger window. I didn't wait to understand. I pressed the gas pedal and sped off into the storm, never looking back. The storm had turned the world into a white void. Snow pounded against the windshield in relentless waves, and my tires crunched over the barely visible road. I had been driving for hours, trying to get home before nightfall. But the storm had other plans. My phone had lost service miles ago, and my gas gauge was dangerously low. Then, through the wall of swirling snow, I saw it. A small gas station, its neon open sign flickering weakly against the storm. Relief flooded through me. I pulled into the lot, my tires skidding slightly on the ice, and parked beside the only other vehicle, a battered old pickup truck, dusted with snow. Inside, the station was unsettlingly quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air smelled stale, like something long forgotten. The place was empty. No cashier, no customers, just rows of dusty shelves and a humming fridge stocked with expired drinks. I frowned, stepping cautiously toward the counter. "Hello?" My voice echoed slightly, swallowed by the unnatural stillness. No answer. The register was open, the screen flickering as if someone had been in the middle of a transaction. A steaming cup of coffee sat abandoned on the counter. Something was wrong. I turned to leave, but then I noticed them. The footprints. A trail of wet footprints led from the door to the back of the store. They were barefoot. The sight sent an immediate chill through me. It wasn't just the fact that someone had walked in here without shoes in a blizzard. It was that the footprints ended abruptly in the middle of the floor, as if the person had simply disappeared. I took a slow step back, every instinct screaming at me to leave. That's when I heard it, a soft rustling coming from the back room. I turned my head toward the beaded curtains separating the storage area from the main store. It swayed slightly as if someone had just passed through it. I didn't want to check. Every nerve in my body told me to get out. But my car was nearly out of gas, and I needed to find someone, anyone, who could help. I took a breath and stepped forward. Pushing aside the curtain, I peered into the dimly lit back room. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, shadows stretching across the floor from a single flickering light bulb. Then I saw it. A person, or what used to be a person, standing in the corner, facing the wall. Their limbs were unnaturally long, their skin a sickly, frost-bitten blue. Their back rose and fell in slow, shuddering breaths. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The air stank of something rotten, something ancient. My heart pounded as I took an involuntary step back. The figure's head snapped toward me. Its mouth was too wide, stretching unnaturally across its face. Its eyes were black voids, bottomless. It grinned, and then in a voice that wasn't mine, wasn't human, it whispered, "You made it just in time." The lights cut out, and the last thing I felt was something cold, wrapping around my throat. The snowstorm had turned vicious, swallowing the road and everything around it in a swirling white haze. I had been driving for what felt like hours, my headlights barely cutting through the thick snowfall. The radio crackled with static, and my phone was useless. No signal, no GPS, nothing but the empty, endless road ahead. I was starting to panic when I saw a faint glow in the distance. As I got closer, it became clearer. A motel, its neon sign buzzing weakly against the storm. The words flickered, barely legible. Cold Pines Motel. I pulled into the small lot, the asphalt covered in a thick layer of snow. A single car sat parked near the entrance, its windows frosted over. There were no signs of life, but I didn't have a choice. I needed to get off the road before I ended up in a ditch, or worse. Inside, the motel lobby was eerily quiet. A small bell sat on the front desk, and beside it, a guest book with only one name written in it, Isaac Holloway. The name sent a shiver through me, though I wasn't sure why. It felt familiar. I rang the bell, the sharp sound echoing through the empty space. Moments later, a man appeared from the back room. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale, his movements unnaturally slow. "You need a room?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. "Yeah," I said, glancing at the guest book again. Is there anyone else staying here?" The man didn't blink. "Just you." A strange unease settled in my gut, but I was too exhausted to argue. I took the key he handed me, room 7, and made my way down the dimly lit hallway. The room was small, old-fashioned, but clean. A single bed, a wooden dresser, and a bathroom with a cracked mirror. I set my bag down and sighed, relieved to be out of the storm. But then, the whispers started. At first, I thought it was just the wind outside, but as I listened, I realized the sound was coming from inside the room. I turned slowly, my breath catching. The closet door, slightly ajar, cast a long shadow against the floor. I stepped closer. The whispers grew louder. I reached for the doorknob, my fingers trembling, and pulled it open. Nothing. Just an empty closet. I let out a nervous laugh, shaking my head. I was just exhausted, my mind playing tricks on me. I shut the closet and turned back to the bed and froze. The guest book. It was lying open on the dresser. I hadn't put it there. And now there was another name written beneath Isaac Holloway. My name. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed the book, my fingers trembling. The ink looked fresh, like it had just been written. I turned back toward the closet. The door was open again, and standing inside, in the darkness, was a man who looked exactly like me. His mouth twisted into a wide, unnatural grin. "You made it," he whispered. The lights flickered, and the last thing I saw was my own face lunging toward me. The snowstorm had turned the world into a lifeless, white abyss. My car struggled against the icy road, tires skidding every time I turned the wheel. I had been driving for hours, trying to make it back to my cabin before nightfall, but the storm had slowed me down more than I'd anticipated. The GPS had lost signal long ago, and my phone was useless. Then, through the swirling snow, I saw it, a dark shape looming at the edge of the road. At first, I thought it was a tree, but as I got closer, I realized it was a house. A large, old Victorian-style house, standing alone in the middle of nowhere. My gut told me to keep driving. Something about the place felt wrong, but my fuel gauge was nearly empty, and if I didn't find shelter soon, I'd be stranded in the storm. I pulled into the snow-covered driveway and stepped out. The cold hit me like a punch to the chest. My boots crunched through the thick snow as I approached the front door. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. But the door? It was unlocked. I hesitated. I knew walking into a stranger's house was a bad idea, but I didn't have a choice. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale, carrying the faint scent of dust and something else, something metallic. The furniture was old, covered in white sheets. A grand staircase stood in the center of the house, leading up into darkness. I called out, "Hello?" Silence. I walked further inside, my footsteps echoing against the hardwood floor. That's when I saw it. A fire, still burning in the fireplace. Someone had to be here. Then, the sound of footsteps creaking upstairs. Slow, deliberate. I turned toward the staircase, my heart hammering. "Hello? I just need help. My car broke down." The footsteps stopped. I swallowed hard. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then, in the dim glow of the fire, I saw something on the floor. A single, fresh footprint in the dust. But it wasn't from my boots. It was barefoot, and it was facing me. I took a step back. A chill crept up my spine, and not from the cold. Then, from upstairs, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." The room plunged into darkness. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. The fire had gone out instantly, as if someone had snuffed it out with a single breath. Then, another whisper, closer, right behind me. "Now, you're one of us." The last thing I saw was a set of pale, frozen hands, reaching for my throat. The snowstorm had turned brutal. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling my car as I struggled to see more than a few feet ahead. The highway had long since disappeared beneath a thick layer of white, and my GPS had stopped working miles ago. Then, through the blinding snowfall, I spotted it, a dimly glowing sign half buried in the snow. Rest stop. 2 miles. Relief flooded through me. I had been driving for hours, my body aching, my eyelids heavy. I just needed to stop for a few minutes, warm up, and then I could get back on the road. I followed the barely visible road signs until I saw the building emerge from the storm. A small, rundown rest stop, its windows dark, except for a faint, flickering light inside. A single car sat abandoned in the lot, snow piled against its tires. I pulled in and killed the engine. The moment I stepped out, the cold sank its teeth into me. I hurried inside, shivering as I pushed through the door. The interior was eerily silent. Rows of vending machines lined one wall, their contents barely visible behind fogged-up glass. A few metal chairs and tables sat scattered across the tiled floor. The air smelled stale, like dust and something rotting. I stepped toward the counter, where an old cashier stood behind the register. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, his eyes sunken, as if he hadn't slept in years. He didn't acknowledge me, just stared at something behind me. I turned, following his gaze. The bathroom door was slightly open. The light inside flickered, and on the floor, just visible past the doorframe, a single bare foot. My stomach twisted. "Hey," I said, turning back to the cashier. "Is someone hurt in there?" He didn't answer. His lips barely moved, but I heard him whisper, "Don't open it." A chill that had nothing to do with the storm crept up my spine. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding. "What do you mean?" His gaze slowly shifted to me, and for the first time, I noticed something wrong about him. His eyes were too dark, too deep, like twin black pits. His fingers twitched against the counter. "If you open it, you'll let it out." I took a step back. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows. The air inside the rest stop felt heavier now, pressing down on my chest. Then, a sound from the bathroom, a soft, wet scraping noise, like something being dragged across the tile. I took another step back. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, the bathroom door began to open, inches at first, then wider. And as the light flickered, I saw it. A figure, twisted and wrong, its limbs too long, its face stretched into a permanent frozen grin, its eyes locked onto mine. The cashier moved so fast I barely saw it happen. 1 second he was behind the counter. The next he was slamming the door shut, his gnarled hands gripping the knob. He turned to me, his sunken eyes now filled with something like desperation. "You have to go, now!" I didn't argue. I bolted for the door, shoving it open and stumbling into the freezing night. My car was still running. I threw myself inside, locking the doors, as my hands fumbled to shift into drive. But before I could pull away, I saw something in the rearview mirror. The rest stop was gone. Nothing but an endless stretch of snowy road behind me. And yet, in my passenger seat, the door had never opened. But there, in the frost on the window, a single word had been traced by an unseen hand. Run. The snowstorm had swallowed the road, turning everything into a featureless white void. My headlights barely cut through the thick flakes, and the wind howled like something alive. I had been driving for what felt like hours, lost in the storm, my phone dead and the gas gauge creeping dangerously close to empty. Then, through the swirling snow, I saw a shape in the distance, a house, its porch light flickering weakly against the storm. Relief flooded through me. I didn't care who lived there. I just needed shelter. I pulled into the driveway, tires crunching over ice, and stepped out into the freezing wind. The house loomed over me, old and weathered, its wooden boards creaking in the wind. I knocked on the door, my numb fingers barely feeling the impact. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I tried the doorknob. It turned easily in my hand, unlocked. Stepping inside, I was immediately hit by a wave of warmth. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The air smelled faintly of old wood and something off. "Hello?" My voice felt too small in the silence. No response. I hesitated, my breath clouding in the dim light. The house felt lived in. A coat hung by the door. A steaming mug of tea sat on the coffee table. But no one was here. Or at least, I thought no one was here. Then I noticed the footprints. They led from the doorway to the center of the room, but they stopped there, like whoever made them had simply vanished. I felt my stomach twist. The fire crackled behind me, its warmth suddenly feeling oppressive, suffocate. I turned toward the stairs, my eyes drawn to the darkness above. That's when I heard it, a creak from upstairs, slow, deliberate. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Maybe it was the wind, I told myself. Maybe the house was just old. Then, another creak, closer this. I stepped backward, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The fire flickered, casting shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't. A whisper brushed against my ear. "Why did you come back?" I spun around. No one was there. The shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, twisting, reaching. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Then, from the top of the stairs, a figure stepped into view. It looked exactly like, but its eyes were wrong. black, empty voids that swallowed the dim light. It tilted its head, that awful whisper curling through the air again. You were never supposed to leave. The fire died instantly, plunging the house into darkness, and in the suffocating blackness, something cold wrapped around my wrist, pulling me back. The snowstorm had turned everything into a blinding, featureless void. My car struggled up the winding mountain road, tires slipping on the ice. I had made a terrible mistake trying to drive in this weather, but I had no choice. There was nowhere to pull over, and the nearest town was miles away. Then, through the swirling snow, I saw it. A cabin, barely visible among the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney and a dim yellow light glowed from inside. Relief flooded through me. Maybe someone could help, or at least let me wait out the storm. I pulled onto the snow-covered driveway, turned off the engine, and stepped out. The cold hit me like a hammer, seeping through my coat instantly. I hurried up the porch and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder, still nothing. I tried the doorknob. It turned easily. Inside, the warmth was immediate, almost suffocating. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. The air smelled faintly of pine and something else, something rotting. Hello? My voice felt too small in the silence. No response. The cabin looked lived in. A steaming cup of tea sat on the wooden table. A book lay open beside it. Someone had been here recently, but where were they? Then I saw it. A set of footprints, leading from the door to the middle of the room, but they stopped there, like whoever made them had simply vanished. A deep, gnawing unease curled in my stomach. I turned, about to leave. Then the door slammed shut behind me. The fire flickered violently, and suddenly, I wasn't alone. From the darkened hallway, something moved. A figure, barely visible in the dim firelight. It stood motionless, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I could hear it breathing, slow and ragged. Then it spoke. You found me. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The firelight flickered over its face. My face, but twisted. Wrong. The thing grinned, its teeth blackened and jagged. You shouldn't have come back, it whispered. The fire died instantly, plunging the cabin into darkness. And in the suffocating blackness, I felt something cold wrap around my wrist, pulling me in. The snowstorm had been relentless, turning the road into an endless sheet of white. My wipers struggled against the buildup of ice, and my headlights barely cut through the thick snowfall. I had been driving for hours, my gas tank dangerously low. When I finally saw it through the storm, a motel. The neon sign flickered weakly. Pine Hollow Inn, vacancy. I pulled into the lot, my tires skidding on the icy pavement. The building was old, a single-story structure with faded blue paint and a sagging roof. Only one other car was in the lot, half buried in snow. I hurried inside, shaking off the cold as I stepped into the dimly lit lobby. A small desk stood against the far wall, with an old-fashioned bell resting on the counter. Behind it, a frail-looking man sat in a chair, staring blankly at the television mounted on the wall. I cleared my throat. Hey, do you have any rooms available? The man didn't react. Sir? I tried again, my voice uneasy. Finally, he turned his head toward me, his eyes dull and lifeless, like he hadn't slept in years. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the flickering light. Room 6, he rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Last one. He slid a key across the counter. I hesitated before taking it, but exhaustion won over my unease. The hallway leading to the rooms was narrow and musty, the walls covered in faded floral wallpaper. My boots creaked against the warped wooden floor as I found my door and unlocked it. Inside, the room was simple. A bed, a nightstand, a small TV. Everything felt off, like it had been abandoned for a long time, but somehow still maintained. The air was stale, carrying a faint metallic scent. I locked the door and sat on the bed, rubbing my temples. I just needed a few hours of sleep before I could get back on the road. Then, the phone rang. I jumped, my heart hammering. The old rotary phone on the nightstand buzzed loudly in the silence. I picked it up, static. Then, through the crackling, a whisper. Don't open the door! A chill crawled up my spine. Hello? Click. Silence. I exhaled shakily, trying to brush it off. Probably a wrong number. Then, a knock on the door. Slow. Rhythmic. My breath caught in my throat. I crept toward the peephole, my pulse pounding. Through the warped glass, I saw myself standing just outside the door. But my reflection was wrong. Its eyes were pitch black. Its mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. I stumbled back as the knocking grew more insistent. Then, the lights flickered, and from behind me, a whisper, right in my ear. You should have never stopped here. The room plunged into darkness, and I wasn't alone anymore.